Yeah, so you can hear me. This is weird. So hi, everyone. My name is John Griffiths. I'm presenting Seeing the Wood for the Trees and how you can make awesome foliage for games. So let's get started. So first things first, who am I? So like I said, hi, I'm John. I'm a senior environment artist and I'm working in VR for a forensics company. But before that, I worked at Traveller's Tales, making the Lego video games. And before that, I worked in animated film, doing 10-minute short films for theme parks and attractions. You can see some of the titles I've worked on displayed. As you can see, a number of jungly things and that sort of thing. Why foliage? So for me, I love making foliage, and it's something I sort of fell into. I think it's quickly become a key component to the environment artist skill set. I think it's a very important area. I think a lot of games are putting more time and energy into it now, and that comes across in these AAA games that you play. I'm going to be walking you through my way of doing foliage. Hopefully you can pick up a few elements that will work for your projects through what I'm talking about. I'm going to be breaking it into 4 key sections, though, just to help it digest a bit better. So we're going to be looking at planning, pre-production, production, and optimization. So before all this, before we even begin to look at a plan or pre-production, it's really good to just get a bit of inspiration. So the best way of doing this is just by checking out the competition, seeing what's there on the market now, what's been released, and playing them. But instead of playing them, I stand still in games. This is probably, I'm sure the developers would want me to play their game. I do play their games in the way that they wanted me to see it, but I also play their games and I try to break them so I can understand how they've created what they've done. And the best way is by standing still and just using the camera to smush it into assets. And when I do this, and you can see hopefully in these images that I've tried to do that to illustrate my point, but I ask myself some questions when I'm doing this. So try to deconstruct the assets. Is it made out of a mesh? Is it made out of a board? Is it a combination of both? What kind of texture maps have they used? Which one are they not using any? How does it fit into the world? Is it kind of just scattered around and placed with no real meaning? Or have they kind of built up the foliage in areas or used it to help funnel the character, the player, down a path? And also the angles. Does it work from all angles? Can you see it from all angles? If you are funneling the player, we only really need to think about from one angle and that kind of thing. And yeah, follow their lead. So what's interesting about these pictures, as I'm sure some of you will maybe recognize some of the games, Horizon's in there, Titanfall 2, The Witness, Rime, God of War, that kind of thing. In Titanfall 2, in some of their plants, they don't have opacity maps. They just have the geometry cut very close to the leaf. In God of War, they have just, some of their plants just have a diffuse or an albedo and an opacity map, and that's it. So it's really interesting, and it's quite nice because you are, when you look at these big things, these productions, you think, oh, they're using everything to make it look amazing. Well, chances are they're not, and they're just cheating it in certain locations. And you can too. So with the inspiration now in, we can start to think about planning. So for me, this is what we start with. And luckily, what I'm going to talk about lines up into start, purely accidental. So first of all, scope. And what I mean by the scope is the size of the project. Is it big? Is it small? But also, what kind of game it is that you are wanting to create. So this could be a PBR open world game is very different to a stylized puzzle game. So it's good to map or just write this down now before we get any further. Next up, it's team and ability. And so this is looking at, the team. Who's going to be working on it? Are they senior? Are they junior? What's their skill set like? Have people done this before? Have we got newcomers to it? What kind of resources do they need, or what kind of software do they have access to? Are some people good in one thing, but less so in another? It's good to, again, work this out now. By role, I mean the role of the foliage in the game. So is it more of a passive role, where it's an aesthetic thing, it's just purely set dressing? Or is it more of an active role where the player interacts with the foliage, or perhaps there's some kind of game mechanic which is in it as well? Again, write it all down. And lastly, time. Time is very important, as I'm sure you're all aware. How much time do we have? What kind of milestones do we need to meet? Again, if we can write all this down and think about this now, we are saving time in the future that we could be better spending in production. So after that, as with any other asset that you're going to make, it's all about reference gathering. I'm sure a lot of you use this already, but Google image search is probably the best thing to use. Use adjectives to describe what you're doing. If you want a spiky plant, but you want it in an ice world, don't be put off that you can only find spiky plants in deserts. Pick out the things that you want to do and just merge them all together. At the end of the day, if it looks like it fits and belongs in the environment, no one's going to care if, that species doesn't belong in that climate. Don't worry about that. What I also do is, I think this is important, is save all your reference offline. I use PureRef for myself. It's just an app where you can drag and drop images into it, and then that overlays over whatever software you're using, and you get a nice tidy save file for it. It just means that if you're, and we're going to come on to this in a moment, if you leave things online, then potentially they could go astray, and then that great picture that you once found, you can't find it anymore. Again, we're just trying to save a bit of time as we go through. Okay, I know we're dying for production now, but there are a few more things, and then we're in. So this is pre-pro list. So this is just all the things that other things we need to consider before really getting into production. So an asset list. Just list down all the species or all the types of foliage you want to do. So we're talking trees, bushes, grass. You would have had an asset list, or you will make one for other assets, so why should this be any different? Dev assignments, you want to know who's working on what, when. It's just helpful, even if you're not the producer or the manager or the lead, it's good to know who's working on what, so either you can pinch things that they're using and use them on what you're working on. It's just another way of speeding up the process a bit more. At this point, it's good to have a 2D image of the player scale versus whatever it is you're creating. This is purely for reference and just an approximation. It's so that you can look at an image and go, okay, so the thing I'm making is this big. Great. And I know that sounds really simple and easy, and it is, but it means that when you go into 3D or to whatever program you're using, you're not going, is it about here? Is it about here? It's taller than this plant, but shorter than this one, and we're just trying to streamline the process as much as possible. Magic number 3 is 3 variants. 3 is the key. So when you're scattering the foliage throughout the world, if you only have one, it's very noticeable that you have only one. Even if you're rotating it and scaling it, it's still just one. With 3, you can get away with people not really noticing that it's 3 things, especially if they're 3 different things, and we are going to get onto that. The reason I stick with 3 is because if you go much more than 3, then you're creating more work for yourself, and that potentially you probably might not use. So as a minimum, 3 is the good one to go for. You can always add in more later. As you test your assets, you might go, it'd be good if we have another variant, but 3, stick to 3. And lastly, make everything accessible. So a bit like with gathering reference, storing it offline, get all of this information and put it in one spot on the server that everyone can access at any time. And again, I know this sounds very obvious, but it is a real struggle when you're hunting for information and you have to speak to someone and they tell you where it is, and then you go to that location and there's nothing in the folder, and then you're just, it's a mess, and it doesn't need to be. By having all of this, so you would have your asset list here, your player scale image, and all your reference all in one spot, it just cuts out any kind of wasted time that we could actually just put into production. Okay, so this is something that Aaron spoke about in his talk yesterday. Iteration is the key here. And I know this goes for any other assets that you're creating, but with Foliage in particular, if we can do the initial setup correctly, we are going to save so much time later on. I can't really emphasize this enough. That's why I gave its own slide with a picture of a key on it. So hopefully, the message will get across. Okay, so I'm now going to walk you through my production process. I'm going to explain it all, and here are some pretty pictures to help illustrate my point. What I tend to do is, we've got the reference already, and in that reference stage, it's really good to try and get as much as you can. Again, saving time, we're not hunting for additional reference later. So in this case, I've chosen this lovely picture of some white flowers. And from this picture, I pull out some color swatches, as you can see next to image 1. And what I do is I just paint over the image. I stay in 2D, painting over the image. So in blue, you can highlight the kind of silhouettes that I pulled out. Once I have, lots of these different silhouettes, I then combine them. And this is where I'm talking about the magic number 3. So I combine them into 3 different silhouettes, 3 different variations for the same asset. It's important at this stage to have some sort of difference between the variants. If they all look like this one here, sorry, there's no clicker. If they all look like this, then there's not very much point having variants. By having some taller, or maybe some with buds, or maybe some with kind of no flowers on them, we can see that it's all part of the same plant, but there is a difference, and that will come through in game as well. Once we've got these lovely little variants, think about where you're going to put them on the texture map. So this is the texture map that we are going to use later on. We're always going to be overwriting this texture map. So maybe you want all your flowers together, or your bushes, or your ground coverage together, but also you might want all your foliage in a particular level on one map. It's really important to think about this now. Yes, we can change this later, but again, we're just sowing some seeds to kind of streamline again. Just thought of sowing now, quite happy with that. Yes, and then from that, we just export 2 maps. All we need, color and an opacity, an alpha map. That's it. And what's great about this process is because we're in 2D, for me, I'm just in Photoshop, I'm not using anything else, and I'm just painting over these silhouettes. It's good to be not perfect at this stage. Be rough, it's all good. No one's judging you here for your work, but yeah, it's quick and it's easy. Okay, so now we've got something that we can take into 3D. So first things first, I get a plane, just 2 triangles, and I get that image and project it onto it. Just a planar projection, that's all you need. And then what I do is I use more geometry to just trace over the top of it, trace around the outline of the silhouette of the asset, and then that gives you these boards. So in the example, I've got my white flowers, yes, but I already had some other flowers, so I just put them on the same sheet. But you can see that we've got 2 different, there's meshes and they're individual. After that, we deform the shapes. So in this case, I had 3 white flower variants, and then in image 3, you can see I've got 6. So I just duplicated them, and it just meant that I could deform them in different ways. Once I've deformed them in different ways, we just combine them, and this is just, slotting, doing the X, the crossover, or however way you want to do it. Round shapes work as well, so if you have your planes in a kind of a round fashion, kind of going outwards, that helps. But yeah, we're not doing anything complicated here. Again, so good at this point to check the scale, just check we're all on the same wavelength. Here he is, just some 3D guy from the internet, and I've just used some replicators to move them around. These boards at this stage are your final asset. Now, we're going to talk about optimization in a bit, but this is, the texture map that we've put this on, plus these boards, these are our final assets. Again, we're trying to speed things up, and if we can get it working here, it's going to work at the end. So next up, we just transfer the normals. So use a dome, and it's literally, I'm sure, as you're aware, your developers, we just go, hey, you've got really nice normals facing out. I want them. We click a button. It inherits them. Done. Easy. And then for me, number 6 is more just for, this is what I do. I do a test render and just see what they look like with just the color and the alpha image. This is fine with just the boards, but it's nice to see it kind of work in how you would expect. So just before we move on, I use Modo to do all my 3D work. I think it's a fantastic product. I know it's not as popular as some of the other programs, but it makes this process very quick and easy. It's very intuitive, and if you are looking to, give it a go, I made a quick start on YouTube that I'll talk about at the end to help you out. So let's get it into game, because that's what we're making. It's important to check things in the game. I use Unreal 4. Again, this is nothing fancy. Just import the meshes, import the maps that we've got. And literally, as you can see in image 1, 3 meshes that we just made, plus 2 maps that came out of Photoshop. Make a master material. Oh, before I continue, I know I'm using Unreal, and you will be using either Unity or some kind of in-house engine. They're all going to be different, but hopefully what I'm going through, you'll be able to replicate yourselves. Disclaimer, I should say. So create the master material and an instance of it, and basically we do this so that the master contains everything that we could potentially want in our shader, and the instance we can go, I want to only use diffuse and the alpha and a normal, and that's it. And we can turn off things that we don't want, but we can turn on things that we do want. And then we just scatter it about, so I just use the Foliage tool in Unreal for this, and it's just on the landscape. Again, we're looking at the player scale, and it's good to test in a test scene away from the actual level, but also, if you want, feel free to just put it straight in. If we've got the final boards anyway, you may as well. It's just in case you have other people working on the same level. You don't want to disrupt their workflow and what they're doing with whatever you're doing. At this point, it's good to analyze and really think about what's working and what isn't working, and it's okay if things aren't working. And if anything is or isn't working, then just go back. Just go back and go back to 2D, go back to 3D, and because we've set things up already, you'll literally just either move inverts, maybe deforming meshes a bit more, put in something extra on that texture map, and just re-importing the assets, and that's it. So that is that. So we've done our setup. Now we need to refine. Sorry, microphone forgot. I use 3D for this, but you can use 2D. There are applications like Substance Designer, that kind of thing. If you're good in that, use that. Play to your strengths. Don't feel like you have to use something for the sake of it, because that's what the industry says it uses. treat it as a kit of parts. So as you can see with this white flower example, I broke it down into magic number 3, 3 petals, 3 larger leaves, 3, well, I've actually got 5, all right, smaller leaves. And, the kind of, is it the stigma of the plant? See, again, I don't really know all the science. It's been a long time since GCSE biology. So you have your parts, and then it's really important at this stage to UV those parts. Now, I know of ZBrush, and you can sculpt away in that and what have you. My way of doing it is in Modo, and yes, maybe it's not the best way, but I know this works, and it works for me. But it's by UVing at this stage, we are making it easier on ourselves. We're getting more information later on than we would have otherwise. So you can see in image 2, just by having this, again, it's a very rough color map. That's all it is. A bit of variety in the greens, a bit of variety that you can't see in the whites. And then that's just it. Yeah, we've got that. It's locked in. So when we start deforming our meshes, we're taking that data with us. If you don't UV and you start deforming, it's then a bit tricky to then match everything up, and it could be more efficient. So maybe if you're going to take one thing away, UV as you go, it will save you so much time. So yes, we deform our kit of parts to, again, further create variation within it. And then, like we did before, we just combine that. So you can see I combined the flower heads together. I made some little buds. And then once we have this larger kit of parts, we then iterate on the shapes that we already had from 2D. We know those work. Now, it's fine if these don't match up because the scale might be a little out. That's totally fine, as long as you get kind of the rough look that you had before, because we know those shapes work. We've tested them. Stick to them. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We can just build upon it. And then from here, we just realign these new meshes onto the grid, so the grid position that we chose back in the 2D setup. Again, it's just, we've already done the work, we're just updating it with the new stuff. Sorry, right, this one. Sorry, I was looking at my watch and I was like, come on. Okay, I had to get Mazza B in there. So now we're actually baking the maps. You can do this in whatever way you want. It's traditional high-low, I'm sure you all know of this, or you could just render the images in 3D. If you're rendering the images, make sure you're using an orthographic camera. I use Modo to get some of the maps out because it's very easy to do so. But yeah, also I use high and low just because things like Marmoset Toolbag exist, and you can look at how big the cage is and whatever's easiest. Yes, we want to get the best bake we can, and if it's good enough for us, it's probably going to be good enough for Mary. The key here is that we don't want any artifacts or anything that's going to throw off the next stage where we add things into it. Just nice, clean textures. Color information we're now getting for free because we've already done that map that was UV'd. If you wanted additional, say, bump information or displacement information, again, we've already done the UV. Just do a map that supports that, update the settings, re-render it, easy. Key maps to get out at this stage, the first 3, so albedo, yes, opacity, yes, normal, yes. If you can't get a normal out, so in Modo, sometimes I get a height map out. There are tools now that allow you to generate a normal from a height map, so it's not the end of the world. And ambient occlusion and curvature, these are just additional. If you have them, that's great. It's not the end of the world if you don't. Okay, so next up, texture detail. So this is our final pass for the textures. This is us cooking out the final board that will be used. I tend to, or now rather, because of things like Substance Designer, we're using non-destructive workflows at this stage. We don't want to damage the source inputs. We want to just kind of run with it, and something like Substance Designer allows you to do this. Because it's simply a plug-and-play thing, it looks quite complicated. It's very simple once you start using it. It allows more experimentation, so don't be afraid of bending things in new ways or adding new noises, that kind of thing. Yes, we've matched our boards to these images, and perhaps they're going to start cutting off things if we transform things too much. But they're very easy to fix. It's not as though you're creating a whole new thing that doesn't even look like the shape of the board. And yeah, again, key maps to get out, and this, of course, depends on what kind of game you're making. Are you doing PBR? Are you not? So albedo, opacity normal, roughness is a key one here. Ambient occlusion, maybe not so, and if you're using subsurface scattering or you want to implement that, then I do recommend you creating some kind of edge mask that you can use to influence that. And then, again, pack your grey maps just because it saves on, saves on information, and it's easier to pack things into one map and then just pull out the data as you need it in the engine. Okay, so after that, we've got our final meshes and we've got our final textures. Let's just get everything in, update that master material that we already set up. So this might be, I do want to implement subsurface scattering, so let's hook that all of that up. I am using PBR, so maybe I need to hook up all of those maps as well. And again, because we're using instance shaders, if we don't need that information, it's just a tick box to say, yes or no, I want it, and it doesn't affect the master. Start adding your foliage into your level. So these are things I've done. So foliage-y things. There is some in this one. I know it's kind of hard to see, but it is in there. Get it in with everything else at that stage as well. Try and bring things up all together at once. It's not always straightforward to do so, but the more you can do it, the better, because you get a better feeling of what you're trying to create, and other people can get the feeling as well. Just quickly to go back to the 2D stage, you can see what it looks like in colour and opacity, and that should be enough. And if other people who aren't working on foliage can see that as well, and they have no issues, then we're all good. Think about growth. So plants grow towards the light, and if left untouched, they can spread out over a huge area. That really helps with grounding things in the level. Play the game, obviously. Sorry, I shouldn't say obviously, because sometimes people don't play the game that they're making, but I say do play the game, because you're making this, you know what's working and what isn't, but also other people making the game might want to comment on it as well, and be open to feedback. Lastly, if the player doesn't notice, then you've done a really good job. And I know that's a really odd statement, but if something stands out in the environment, it snaps you out of the illusion. So again, by playing the game, you're ironing out all of these kinks, and if they don't notice, then you have done a really good job. Okay, last 5%, the polish. Made this myself. So yeah, I suppose I was jumping ahead of myself, but match the standards throughout development. So maybe get everything up to that 2D stage in-game, and so we can all see it at the same standard. And then from there, just everything has a final texture image, everything has the correct material with the correct maps in, that kind of thing. Again, this ties into the if something sticks out, it's very noticeable. You want to make it so people don't notice. Shader additions could include if you wanted two-sided normals. Again, this will be different depending on the engine you're using. In Unreal, this kind of thing exists. Subsurface scattering, if you want to get the plant to react to the light in a realistic fashion, but this could increase render time, that kind of thing. And wind, so use vertex color information and you can plug the wind into the shader to just give it a little bit of a wave so that even just a little bit of the wind around you makes you feel like you're more in a place, which is great. Wildlife is good, so God of War have a really good example of this. They just have butterflies flying around in nice areas, and it just helps with the calming feeling if that's something you want to do. Likewise, you could have, flies buzzing around over dead things, and again, that gives you another feeling as well, but at the cost of not very much. If you have some small animals already, I should say, don't make small animals just for this stage. That are just rummaging around in the undergrowth. Again, in Horizon, they have lots of smaller things going around. It's just really great. It makes it feel more like it's part of the world. Think about the life cycle of the plant. So we're talking about saplings up to the asset that you've made, the full-blown creation, down to dying elements or dead leaves, that kind of thing. Maybe incorporate dead elements into the asset you've made, or scatter it around. Maybe have it as a separate asset that you just scatter around as well. Again, it just helps ground it in reality. And I'm guilty of this a lot, but you've got to know when to stop. And this is why we look at time in the beginning, so that you or your producer or whoever can say, right, I've got this much time, so I want to leave this much time to polish. Things always take longer than you expect, but that's just the way of it seems. But it helps if you've already matched the standard to everything's at the same standard, then maybe it's time to stop there, or, okay, this is a key thing, this is at the start of the game, maybe we'll just add a bit more polish here. It's up to you. Okay, so we're going to quickly talk about optimization. There are a lot of things you can do. Obviously, we want to be on the greener side than the other side. So LODs is a really good thing, level of detail assets. You have the closer we are to something, the higher resolution it is. The further away, the less resolution it has. And as you run through or you're walking through the level, that kind of happens without you really noticing. You will need additional meshes for this to work, but again, you start with the mesh that you already have and then just pull out verts to get rid of them. I think in Unreal they're tied into Simplygon. I could be wrong, so it is more of an automatic process now, which is really handy. Overdraw is a bit of a problem. So this is when you have assets with opacity kind of stacked on top of each other. We can reduce that by cutting the actual silhouette closer to the silhouette of the plant. So in the boards I did earlier, they were quite broad. So that way instead for this, you would just cut the mesh closer to the branches. And then you could tie that into a LOD as well, so you would have the cut-out kind of overdrawn asset as the highest LOD, and then work back from there. Turn off maps that you don't need. Yes, it's great to have all the bells and whistles, but you don't need them all the time, so turn them off. Likewise, if you can't see a mesh, then why should you need to draw it? It's kind of, if it's been occluded by something else, then if you can, just get rid of it. Don't delete it, just don't let the engine draw it. Again, reduce draw calls by combining things like texture maps together. Maybe you stick to one UV map, and things like, do you need vertex color for it? If you're not using wind, do you need it? It's all about just stripping out things that you have, which would be nice, but this game also needs to run. And use performance profilers. This will more than anything show you the biggest culprits, and you should hone in on them first, but it's always good to have these in mind before you begin, so you can, again, we're trying to streamline it and we're trying to cut down wasted time. Yes. So to recap, we talked about planning, inspiration, so standing still in games. Games nowadays, they have lovely music. Just get rid of all the enemies, because there's nothing worse when you're trying to look for something and something comes out of the blue. But yeah, standing games, that's really great. And we're looking at start, scope, team, ability, role of the foliage, and how much time you have. In pre-production, get all of that reference as much as you can, save it offline. Think about the pre-pro list, so with the asset list, who's working on what when. Magic number 3, player scale, make sure that it's all offline. Offline, but in an accessible place. After that, production, so stay in 2D to start. We're literally just painting over things that already exist. Refining in 3D, so we're setting up the board and such. We're getting it into engine, we're looking at it, we're testing it, we're working out what's working, what isn't working, and then repeating if need be. We're getting out our baked maps, and we're getting those into Substance Designer or whatever you use. Finalizing the final asset. Texture, sorry. Then we're getting all of that information, dressing our levels. Again, seeing it in context really helps. And any polish we might be able to do at that stage. And lastly, optimization, LODs, overdraw reductions, turning things on and off, draw calls, using profilers. I was talking to someone, another developer last night, about putting this into time. Now, I don't want to say this takes this long, this takes this long. And as we all know, how long is that piece of string? It's up to you, obviously, what you put your energy into, but I just want to highlight that the more pre-production, the more planning you can do, you're able to do, the easier the rest of the process becomes. And that really is where the time is saved. Anything you can save at the beginning, you can invest more into. It opens up more time for production, for example. And some key takeaways. I know it's lunch, I know. If you have a good plan going in, you will make good assets coming out. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things when you don't need to. This even ties into magic number 3. If you have 3 as the minimum, you won't need anything else unless you really have to. And then you have everything in place already, so it's easy to go back. Iterate, and iterate quickly and easily, maybe they should say. Again, what I've talked about is hopefully setting it up so that you can experiment more, you can change things more. If you're able to do this, you're able to create a better product at the end. So by having something that you can iterate on at the beginning is excellent. Use non-destructive workflow. So this is things like I said, Substance Designer is really great for this. You have the source material. We don't want to change the source material. We want to use it. Just plug and play and try new things. And if they don't work, just take the node out. That's what's a key thing there. And there's more than one way to optimize. So again, talk to your tech team, the people who are keeping the eye on the FPS, that kind of thing. They're going to know what's best. But if you have some kind of overview of what you know I can do myself before I even get to that stage, it's really great. Okay, so, that's my talk. But if you want to, we'll have questions. I think there's time. My alias is Graffiti. It's like a play on my surname and graffiti. Terrible. So I'm on all these platforms, and some key ones for me to point out here. I do twice a week I do a live game art stream where I'm creating stuff for games, and it's a great place if you have any questions. I can demo it live. I'm happy to do that, and I like doing it as well. Tutorials that come out of that, so I mentioned Modo earlier, end up on YouTube, and I'm on these other things as well. And hopefully they're all now linked together, so if you only take one, you'll find the rest of me. Thank you, for having me, and I hope that was helpful to maybe somebody. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the talk. Very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm working with Blender and Quixel and Unreal.
Okay.
That's kind of my workflow for this stuff. And I really come from a design background, so I'm really just getting my feet into I need a lot of foliage because I'm making a game set in woodland. which obviously then brings up trees.
Yeah.
And one of those interesting things to search for is how many triangles should a tree have? What's your opinion on this, please?
Ah, the old. I have to say a certain number, and then everyone takes that way. No, I understand. And
what factors do you count into when you're thinking about this?
For me, and this kind of goes for other assets as well, I don't like seeing faceting. So when you look at something, and I can see where the polygons are, so try and steer clear of that. With current technology, you can put more vertices in. It's fine. It can handle it. So for me, just smooth things out if you can. Yes, the normals help with that, but don't feel like you can't put more in. In terms of the tree, so obviously you have the trunk, and then you have kind of your key branches, your larger branches. That's all geometry. And then from that, sprouting from them, you have your branches. Now on your branches, those are 2D textures. Now, it's up to you, and this is why it's good to look at games. So in God of War, they have a really lovely pine tree, and its geometry, it's really thin, it's really small, it's about player height, and it's geometry trunk and geometry branches, but then some of the branches, some of the extra branches are geometry, but some of them are boards as well, and also their needles, they're just crosses on planes, and they've just got little planes all around them, so no flat textures, there is some 3D element to each piece of it. So I would go down that route. Of course, depending on where the player is, it's kind of like, well, if I'm at the trunk itself, am I really going to see that information? Well, yes, of course I will see it, but could I strip it out if I don't need it? So it's good to have, yes, geometry in the base for that detail, but also don't feel like you're tied to it either. It's the boards, the alpha boards can work wonders more than geometry can sometimes. So, yeah, that's where I would start. I know I only looked at flowers, and I know there's all kinds of things out there, but yeah, please reach out, get in touch if you have any questions, and I will
might do.
answer.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My stuff's in VR, and boards really don't look any good in VR. Flowers don't look good in VR. Are there geometry tree specialists out there who will make a tree in actual geometry so that in VR you can kind of walk around it and it doesn't look odd?
Yeah, so you could use a program like SpeedTree. It's really good for doing trees. I mean, it's called SpeedTree. So maybe have a look at that. The reason I haven't talked about it is because not everyone has access to it, i.e. in the studio you're working or that kind of thing. Yeah, I would...
But the leaves are then still often billboards, as you identified.
Yeah, I think... Okay, my experience in VR is only limited. I've literally just changed jobs, but yeah, maybe... Depending on how close, I'm guessing you're saying you're literally at it, you could either push it away so that maybe you're not, does it have to be so close to you, but also maybe you have LODs so that you have geometry in the highest LOD, but then after that, as we're further away, you just switch it to a mesh, which is just a board. That might suffice, but then you'd have to look at, how does that run as well? Am I getting a good frame rate in VR especially? Unfortunately, experimentation here, and you could work this experimentation into planning as well. Anything that you can do to help the process later on, for speed and for, just trying new things out. That's where I would suggest to go. Sorry, I didn't really answer your question there, but
you did.
I was thinking about it and saying it at the same time. Difficult sometimes. I think a gentleman at the back there.
Time for one more question.
Thank you for the talk. Just to let you know, my background base is kind of programming, but I'm doing art as well on a particular project. And I just want clearly your experience in foliage and trees and in game development. The game involves scenery and trees and woodland, that kind of thing. But what I wanted to ask you was, we've made objects, high polys, and myself, and in Maya and Substance Painter, and it looks stunning, brilliant, absolutely what you'd expect it. I drop it into Unity, and it's just all washed out.
Looks
It's
awful.
horrible.
Yeah.
I had the shock of my life.
Yeah.
So I changed the orthographic camera to perspective to try and give intensity of the light, and I kind of changed the directional lights. And I got rid of one, and then it was too dark.
Okay, so
What am I doing wrong?
So, how I would break this problem down, and this is when people come to the stream, this is how I do it. I just take the problem and I go through the steps for what I would do. So, it looks great in substance, but doesn't look great when it comes out. So, the information that are the source images okay? So, the ones that I showed you with Mary on them, has your color map got any kind of lighting information in it? If it has, take it out. Again, with the normal map, are there any artifacts in it or anything like that? In the actual boards, the geometry that you're putting the map on, how do the normals look? If the normals are all in on themselves, then it's not going to look good with the light in. So by transferring the normals to a dome, you're forcing the normals to look outwards. So therefore, when it's lit, it looks lovely as the light plays across the surface. When you're in, so I haven't used Unity, but I can imagine it's the kind of a similar setup. See what's in the shader as well. Is anything turned on that you don't expect to be turned on?
It does look good, and you can see the metallic effects, and I'm getting there. It's just, imagine like a photo in Photoshop on a really high brightness.
Yeah.
I'm probably doing something wrong in a value somewhere there. It's got the normals in, it's got the albedos in, it's got the diffusers in.
So if you're going down a PBR pipeline, which by saying metalness I'm sure you are, it's good to look at your values in your color map and also your roughness map. So depending on, for roughness, depending on what value it is, it's being read as I'm representing this value. So a kind of, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 171 might be kind of a mid-grey, lighter grey, but that could be interpreted as, a brick material. And brick is not organic. So maybe look at that, but also in the albedo, that has a color range as well. I would recommend if you type in, PBR chart into Google, it will come up with some images which you can literally pick out the colors from, pick out the values from the images, and they will give you the correct things. And then from that, your texture map, adjust your texture maps there to those kind of values. And then hopefully they should just transition and work. But if they don't, it should be just minimal tweaks in-game to get them working.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have, but one more round of applause for John, please. Thank you.